Good day, everyone. This day, we are going to embark on another module, specifically on stroke. So, we have now our module 7 for week 9 of midterms. So, for this week, we will going to have the different details, different complications, and of course, the treatment approach that we can employ for stroke events. That includes pathophysiology, clinical presentation, and of course, evidence based management for us clinical pharmacists. For our learning outcomes, for everyone's information, at the end of this module, I intend the learners to be able to describe the pathophysiology of ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke, identify the clinical presentations of acute stroke and transient ischemic attack, also recognize major risk factors for stroke and development and recurrence, apply diagnostic strategies for accurate and timely differentiation of stroke subtypes. Also, we would like to attain this non-pharmacological and pharmacological skills. What are the interventions that we can give for acute management and also for secondary prevention of stroke? We are expected to evaluate therapy adjustments in special populations for elderlies, pregnant women, CKD patients, patients with atrial fibrillation, as we have discussed prior, people who has atrial fibrillation are prone to having stroke events. And one of the approaches for atrial fibrillation management is stroke prevention, aside from thromboembolic event prevention and rate and rhythm control. And lastly, as clinical pharmacists, we are expected to formulate how to monitor parameters and follow up plans. So we are expected to design follow up plans to ensure patient safety, efficacy, and most especially the adherence of a patient on their medication. Because for cardiovascular diseases, most of the time it starts with hypertension. And as mentioned during our initial lectures, during prelim, hypertension and dyslipidemia as well, it starts with asymptomatic phase. There are no symptoms, and when symptoms came, it is already in the advanced stage of the cardiovascular events. So, the adherence of our patients will help control the gravity of the situation. Okay? Moving forward, let's now have the introduction. So, stroke is a leading cause of disability and mortality. It causes disability for patients because stroke commonly or generally affects the central nervous system. It is sometimes, or it is also called rather, CVA or cerebrovascular accidents. It affects our brain, our central nervous system, but it is brought by cardiovascular events. Okay, so it will hinder a person's ability to move around, to walk, to talk, to eat. That will now be a disability of a patient, of a person experiencing stroke. If the event is very serious, it leads to death. Hence, if hypertension And this lipidemia is that properly handled due to, first of all, non adherence of a patient to its maintenance drugs, it really causes mortality. And it is the highest among the diseases that causes death worldwide. We have what we call ischemic stroke, accounting 85% of cases. Later on, I will discuss what is an ischemic stroke is about. We have also hemorrhagic stroke. The rest of the 15% is because of hemorrhagic stroke or hemorrhage that happens inside the brain. This disability and mortality, it results from either a vascular occlusion brought by an ischemic event or an intracranial bleeding brought by a hemorrhagic event. So we have to make sure that we observe early recognition of stroke events so that we can make sure that the prognosis of our patient and the quality of life of our patient is the quality of life of our patient is preserved. This is what we have here. Time is brain. As mentioned, cerebrovascular accident or stroke happens in the brain, either ischemic or hemorrhagic, and there's always a very crucial time to treatment rule. Because every second that the brain is deprived of oxygen, it will result to multiple folds of mortality. In addition, transient ischemic attacks or TIAs are important predictors of future stroke. For patients who have already a status post of TIA, it may increase or it really increases their chance of experiencing either an ischemic or a hemorrhagic stroke, with the highest risk occurring in the first few days after the episode. Right? So, this module highlights the need for early diagnosis, urgent intervention, secondary prevention strategies as emphasized by DiPiro and Kleindorfer. We, as clinical pharmacists, play a pivotal role in acute stroke management. In other countries, there are stroke management clinics that are manned by pharmacists. We here in the Philippines, we don't have specific clinics for that, but for stroke patients in the hospital, as pharmacists, we have to embark on giving our thoughts, giving our recommendations, giving our formulated plans for the prevention, secondary prevention, and to promote adherence among patients who have experienced stroke so that their quality of life will be preserved, as mentioned a while ago. This stroke management includes thrombolytic therapy, blood pressure control. We have also antiplatelet and anticoagulant selections that are part of the drugs or medications that are given to the patients and are used for long term so that their mortality rate for strokes will decrease. There are different types of strokes. Here, this is ischemic stroke. If we can pay attention on the occlusion on this part and only small blood flows going to this direction, it is evident that there is decreased O2 on this arrow moving forward. We have also hemorrhagic stroke. From the word hemorrhagic, there is bleeding. So there is bleeding, a bursting of blood vessels inside the brain. And then this is where we have the transient ischemic attack. So we can see here that there is atherosclerotic plaque on the surroundings of the blood vessel here. And we have a very small amounts of small O2 or small blood that carries O2 within the blood vessels going to the brain. So we have here the three types of strokes. What differentiates this what differentiates these two from TIA? We have here 24-hour cutoff, and we have here the events. If the cardiovascular events, happen less than 24 hours and is resolved less than 24 hours, and the events are reversible, or should we say damages are reversible, it is referred as transient ischemic attack. If the manifestations lasted more than 24 hours and the damages are irreversible, it is referred as stroke. So it's either be an ischemic attack or a hemorrhagic attack. For ischemic stroke, the blood clot from maybe an atherosclerotic plaque allows this to happen when there is occlusion. The blood clot is occluding the blood vessel. The blood flow will be stopped at a certain area of the brain. We have here the area where there are lack of oxygen causing this part of the brain to call as ischemic or maybe dying. Once this ischemic stroke happen, there will be arterial occlusion, probably due to thrombosis or embolism. What we need to do is to revascularize and prevent secondary. What we need to do, our treatment goal is to revascularize and do secondary prevention. For ischemic stroke, we have two management strategies. The first one is acute BP management, acute blood pressure management. The second one is secondary prevention. So we will now first discuss acute blood pressure management. In the event of ischemic stroke, we will need to figure a lot of things out. And one of the most important thing to take note is the blood pressure. For a patient without comorbidities, permissive hypertension is allowed up to 220 over 120 millimeter mercury, only for the first 48 to 72 hours. We have to take note that when we lower BP too early in these patients that has not shown benefit may worsen cerebral perfusion. So we should not stop or make an abrupt lowering of BP to avoid, in order to avoid hypoperfusion. Allowing the BP to be 220 over 120 is referred to as permissive hypertension, but it is only allowed up to a maximum of 72 hours for patients without comorbidities. Moving forward, we have thrombolysis. Thrombolysis is achieved by administering TPA or the IV alteplase. Also, we have another drug called tenecteplase. This is given within 4.5 hours of onset. The time to the time to treatment is within 4 hours. So it has to be given in order to dissolve all the occlusions and allow the flow of blood. Later on, we're going to have blood flow in the ischemic part of the brain, allowing oxygen to fill the area with depleted oxygen. We also have thrombectomy. Thrombectomy is only given for large vessel occlusion. Okay, this is within 6 hours of onset of the stroke. This is not for all patients. This is case to case basis at it, and it needs imaging to make sure that this patient is a candidate for thrombectomy. Moving forward, we have secondary prevention. Here comes most of our drugs. The antiplatelet therapy, oral anticoagulants, statins, and of course, we have non-medication intervention. So as mentioned before in our different topics, we have for antiplatelet therapy, for monotherapy, we have aspirin. If dual antiplatelet therapy is advised, it is with aspirin and clopidogrel. For non-cardioembolic stroke, we have also oral anticoagulants for cardioembolic stroke. In example, patients with atrial fibrillation. This is an embolus coming from the heart, coming directly from the heart. So if the embolus is found out to be coming directly from the heart, the treatment to be given will be oral anticoagulants. That is for cardioembolic stroke. But if the embolus is not coming from the heart, directly from the heart, we will give antiplatelets. Moreover, of course, the reason for stroke starts with high blood pressure and high lipids. So statins should be given for all ischemic stroke patients and TIA patients. Occlusions that is present there is due to accumulation of lipids or accumulation of atherosclerosis forming plaque that resulted to thrombosis and emboli. We have also carotid intervention like stenting, and this is applicable for symptomatic patients. Then we have hemorrhagic stroke. As you see on this picture, we have the bursting of the blood vessel, maybe because of too much pressure and because of other events that leads to bursting. Hemorrhagic stroke results from rupture, sometimes linked to aneurysm, but most of the time because of hypertension. Also, it can be caused by anticoagulants. So if it is thought to be hemorrhagic stroke, which is confirmed through imaging, there will be acute BP management. And the allowed BP for patients with hemorrhagic stroke runs about 150 to 220 over 140 millimeter mercury. So it is almost the same with the ischemic stroke of the permissive hypertension. Since there's too much bleeding, of course, we will going to reverse the anticoagulants. If the patient is receiving warfarin, we have to give vitamin K as anticoagulant reversal, the antidote, and also 4-factor PCC if available. If we gave direct oral anticoagulants, we have to give the following: idarucizumab for the bigatran, andexamet alpha for rivaroxaban, apixaban, and enoxaban. And also we can give PCC for 10A inhibitors, anticoagulants. For hemorrhagic stroke, we can give or implement surgical interventions. It is required for cerebral hemorrhage with mass effect or subarachnoid hemorrhage due to aneurysmal rupture. So clipping or coiling is needed to be done to stop bleeding ASAP. Moreover, the third type of stroke is the transient ischemic attack. I have given the different I have given the difference between the three types of stroke a while ago. For this figure, it shows here the area of temporarily blocked blood flow. That is because of a blood clot in the middle of our cerebral artery. There will be blockage in the artery. A TIA is not really a stroke, it is a warning sign actually. Although the symptoms resolve within 24 hours, but it signals high imminent stroke risk. There should be urgent evaluation within the first 48 hours. Our patient should be admitted in the cardiac unit for optimum monitoring. We have to initiate antiplatelet therapy, addressing blood pressure, managing risk factors so that we can make sure that the warning sign, the TIA event, will be a good. Um, we have to make sure that the TIA, as it is a warning sign, is being picked up properly to prevent stroke to happen. For a very short discussion on pathophysiology for ischemic stroke, as mentioned, it is caused by thrombotic or embolic occlusion of cerebral arteries and causing decreased cerebral blood flow. It will result into neuronal ischemia and if untreated results to infarction. While hemorrhagic stroke, the mass effect, the increased intracranial pressure, the neurotoxicity from blood products led to rupture of blood vessels. Again, for hemorrhagic stroke, there is a rupture of blood vessel due to increased pressure because of hypertension. Leads to mass effect, increased intracranial pressure, and neurotoxicity from blood products. As mentioned, most of the stroke, we have 85% ischemic and the rest is hemorrhagic stroke. How to detect or how to assess a patient that is having stroke at the moment? We need to know the clinical presentation of a patient. It is denoted by this mnemonic FAST. You have to take note about the face. Is it drooping? For the arms, can the patient raise both arms? If no, then that's a candidate. Speech, is it slurred or jumbled? And time, we have to make sure that if all of these are yes, it's time to call 911 right away. So basically, it's suddenly happening of a patient with basically it's suddenly happening, sudden onset of neuronal deficits for a patient with compelling long-standing hypertension. Patient will feel unilateral weakness, either left or right. Facial droop, facial droop, speech difficulty. We have also visual loss, dizziness, ataxia, and confusion. So if these are seen in a patient, then we really have to call 911 right away. Now, for the risk factors, as mentioned all the time, we have two, the non-modifiable and the modifiable. So for non-modifiable, we have age, sex, race, family history. All the same with the dyslipidemia risk factors, the one that we had for Framingham risk score. For modifiable, we have to take note when we counsel our patient, we really have to highlight that the complication of hypertension really is stroke. So it has to begin during counseling a patient with hypertension to make them realize that adherence to antihypertensive drug is really essential to modify and decrease their risk to experience or to have stroke in the nearest future. Also, patients with diabetes, patients who are dyslipidemic, patients who are smoking, and of course, patients with atrial fibrillation. Those who are obese and those who have sedentary lifestyle. So all of these modifiable risk factors, as clinical pharmacists, we have a responsibility to help our patients be able to modify these risk factors. We have also risk factors brought by medications that we as pharmacists, we must make sure that our patients know these risks. If they're taking oral contraceptives, they're taking hormone therapy, they are having anticoagulant misuse, these drugs will make our risk higher for stroke events. We have also identified drugs here like triptans and cocaine, which causes vasospasm and thereby results to hypertension. Of course, excessive alcohol. We have to take note that when a person excessively takes alcohol, there are risks. Risk of fall, that may increase hemorrhagic stroke if a patient has hypertension. Then also, if a patient is taking anticoagulants, it may lead to hemorrhagic stroke. These are manifested use with the laboratory results of INR. If there's high INR, there might be higher, there is a higher chance to have bleeding. We have hormone replacement therapy and oral contraceptives. These drugs gives us higher risk for ischemic stroke instead of hemorrhagic stroke. So hearing from all of this, what are the goals of therapy? These are the goals of therapy that we have to know so that we can formulate our plan very well. We have to make sure that we can restore cerebral perfusion. And there's mention a while ago about permissive hypertension. That is part of our management or our action to restore perfusion, prevent stroke progression and recurrence. So we have to be crucial with our time. We have to observe what time that stroke event happened and when should be we giving the medications. We have to minimize complications and disability, and that also comes with time. We have to manage comorbidities and secondary risk factors. Giving consideration, um, giving considerations on these goals of therapy, we can now craft an effective or a good recommendation plan, management plan for our patients. Our plan should be Our plan should reflect the things that would help us measure the outcomes. And that includes diagnostic tools. We can have imaging like CT scan and MRI to differentiate ischemic versus hemorrhagic stroke because management depends what type of stroke we are dealing with. There are medications that is specific for ischemic and specific only for hemorrhagic stroke. Also, in preventing complications and managing comorbidities, we need to check for lab tests, glucose level, CBC, coagulation profile, lipid panel. We have to monitor the cardiac rhythm to make sure if the patient has atrial fibrillation or, or none. We can also use stroke scales like from NIH to monitor or to we can use stroke scales also to evaluate the patient. As we create our recommendation, we have to give consideration for non-pharmacological measures. All of these are very essential to make sure that our role as a pharmacist will be optimized. Following these non-pharmacological measures, of course, we should make sure that we are giving correct pharmacological measures to the patients based on their diagnosis. So, we have here pharmacological measures for acute ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke. I have already mentioned a while ago during the general introduction for the types of stroke, how to approach these different events. So for acute ischemic stroke, we can have thrombolysis, also we can have thrombectomy and blood pressure management. And then all of these are given. For hemorrhagic stroke, we have to perform reversal of anticoagulants or prevent and stop bleeding according to our guidelines. We need to do surgical intervention to stop bleeding ASAP. For Canadian Cardiovascular Society, this is the algorithm for acute stroke. If the patient is suspected to have stroke, before anything else, before giving any drug, we have to perform CT scan or MRI. This will differentiate the events if it is ischemic stroke or hemorrhagic stroke. As mentioned a while ago, there are contraindications in the treatment with the two. You cannot give one drug specific for hemorrhagic to the patient with ischemic stroke. So, performing CT scan and MRI should be done ASAP to differentiate and to give what proper pharmacotherapy is needed by the patient. Aside from CT scan and MRI, we have to perform ECG to check for atrial fibrillation, CBC, and INR also to make sure if it's hemorrhagic stroke to have the profile of the patient. Glucose, electrolytes, and also serum creatinine because we can also detect if it's hemorrhagic stroke if it is brought by the adverse events caused by anticoagulants related to their kidney function and may result to dosage and may result to dosage as and may result to dosage adjustment as needed. So when if it's found out to be ischemic stroke, we have to follow this. If symptoms is recognized within 4.5 hours, if the patient condition or symptoms started and was recognized within 4.5 hours, then the patient meets the criteria of TPA protocol. We can give Altiplase to our patient. And then, if the patient's symptoms was not recognized within the time to treatment allowance, we have to admit the patient to the stroke unit and be monitored. We have also here a specific one after giving Altiplase, the EVT or endovascular thrombectomy. As mentioned, this is only applicable for case-to-case basis if the occlusion happened on a larger vein and it is confirmed from the CT scan and MRI. On the other hand, if it is found out in the CT scan or MRI that it is hemorrhagic stroke, then we have to refer to neurosurgery, maybe for clipping or coiling. And then we have to bring the patient to stroke unit, control hypertension, and vasospasm. So we are not giving patients, we are not giving Altiplase to patients with hemorrhagic stroke because Altiplase dissolves the clot and allows the blood to flow, and it will precipitate bleeding if we will give it to a patient with hemorrhagic stroke. That is why this is very important to perform CT scan and MRI first to differentiate the two so that we will not have the mistake of giving altiplase to a patient with or experiencing hemorrhagic stroke. So what is altiplase? TPA or altiplase is the first line therapy for patients with ischemic stroke. It has to be administered 4.5 hours of symptom onset, that is time to treatment. If IV altiplase considered after 4.5 hours, we have to consult a physician. They are the ones who will determine if we will still or allowed to proceed with giving of altiplase, even the time to treatment has lapsed. So as mentioned, it is indicated for patients with ischemic stroke. The patient must be 18 years old and above, and the dose for our altiplase is zero point 0.9 milligram per kilogram to maximum of 90 milligram infused over 60 minutes. So please make sure that we are all familiar with the dosing of altiplase. It's 0.9 per kilogram, maximum of 90 milligram infused to our patients for 60 minutes. After that, we need to wait for 24 hours at least before we can give aspirin. 24 hours waiting time after the 60th minute before we can give the first dose of aspirin with 160 milligram strength. And that should be and we should make sure that our CT scan exclude intracranial hemorrhage, because giving altiplase and after 24 hours giving aspirin will increase intracranial hemorrhage. Also, no concomitant heparin, warfarin, or aspirin during during within 24 hours of giving altiplase. CT scan, MRI must be completed prior to starting antiplatelet and anticoagulant. You should have the result. Target door to altiplase time should be less than 60 minutes. Meaning to say, when the patient comes in to the hospital, the patient should be CT scanned, should have the result, and should receive altiplase when indicated. So for example, the patient's symptoms started and was noted at 12 noon, and then they traveled to the hospital, arrived in the hospital at 2:30 p.m. This is already 2.5 hours. We have 2 hours time to treatment left for this patient. This 2:30 p.m. here is our start in counting target door to altiplase treatment. We have to give IV altiplase within 60 minutes. When the patient enters the hospital, we should give our management within 60 hours of TPA if indicated. So we really have to make sure that if a patient is a stroke patient, we should bring it to a hospital that is or capable of reading or capable of administering the procedure of CT scan and MRI and capable of the results producing the results within less than 60 minutes so that this TPA can be given. Now, for hypertension management, blood pressure should be lowered and maintained below 185 to 110 before alteplase therapy and kept below 185 to 110 for the next 24 hours after administration. This is following also after or within the timeline of permissive hypertension. We should not abruptly decrease a patient's blood pressure for a patient experiencing stroke. The target level of blood pressure to achieve and maintain in the hyperacute phase of stroke is unknown. The choice of antihypertensive and routes of administration should be chosen to avoid aggressive reduction in blood pressure. So, in this guideline here from Canadian Cardiovascular Society, these are the suggested medication in order to avoid aggressive reduction in blood pressure. This side here is for prior TPA, and this side here is during and after TPA administration for patients who have ischemic stroke. Please take note of labetalol, hydralazine, and nitroglycerin. It's almost the same with the other. Just continue labetalol IV, hydralazine, or nitropatch. But this time, we can add enalapril IV if needed. All right? So, these are the conditions that we need to take note for us to monitor properly our patients. What are the contraindications to alteplase therapy? Absolute contraindication, of course, that's why we really have to conduct CT scan because we do not want to have our patients hemorrhaging and will have hemorrhaging. We don't want active hemorrhage. And we can see that from the CT scan. Any types of hemorrhage is contraindicated. What are other contraindications that requires clinical judgment and specific scenario? We have historical, we have CT scan and MRI findings, clinical findings, and laboratory findings. And these are things we need to consider when we suggest our patients, suggest to the doctor if the patient should give or receive TPA. Please read and memorize. Moreover, for acute stroke management, we employ acute antiplatelet therapy. Patients not already on antiplatelet therapy pre-stroke and not going to receive alteplase, they may receive aspirin 160 milligram initial loading dose once the CT scan exclude hemorrhage. Then, after the loading dose, we will now have low dose ASA continued long term for secondary prevention. In acute high risk TIA or minor ischemic stroke of non cardioembolic origin, as mentioned a while ago, we will going to give dual antiplatelet therapy using aspirin with clopidogrel. This is the regimen, followed by low dose ASA monotherapy. So we will going to have DAPT for 1 month, and the patient should go back to his doctor after 1 month, and that will now allow monotherapy of aspirin for lifetime. Long-term dual antiplatelet therapy still may be considered in some specific patients. However, it is generally not recommended for long-term use to have it in order to prevent bleeding risk. In patients receiving alteplase, we have to wait until 24 hours, as mentioned a while ago. We have to exclude intracranial hemorrhage before we can give acute antiplatelet therapy of aspirin. We have also to employ stroke prevention. Stroke prevention is done through primary or secondary prevention. We should not discount lifestyle modification, balanced diet. We have to monitor sodium intake, our exercise. If you remember the suggestion for the intensity and the length of exercise, a patient with hyperlipidemia should have. That also apply here. Weight control, alcohol intake. For blood pressure, this is the single most important modifiable risk factor. Please take note, it's the single most important modifiable risk factor. We have to make sure that our patient has a controlled BP of less than 140/90, and for diabetic patients, less than 130/80, and an HbA1c of less than 7%. In all of this. For secondary prevention, we now have lipid management following the guidelines that we have mentioned under dyslipidemia. We will initiate ACE plus thiazide diuretic once patient is stable post-stroke. May apply to patients without hypertension, but less clear in the guideline when is that post-stroke. It allows or improves stroke outcomes. We also have to initiate antiplatelet or anticoagulant therapy. Repetitively, I kept saying it has to be 24 hours after TPA administration. And once this is being excluded. So you have to make sure that is understood and that is carried out properly. For special populations and considerations, we have our elderly. They are high risk for bleed, so we have to monitor the dosing and the blood pressure. Pregnant women, we have to avoid warfarin, and we can use heparin for anticoagulation. For CKD patient, avoid DOAC or our dabigatran, rivaroxaban, apixaban, and noxaban. Patients with atrial fibrillation, because they have long-term anticoagulation, like this one. So we have to monitor their dose and their kidney function. For monitoring and follow-up, in hospitals, we have to check neurological checks, neurological functions, can evaluate using NIHSS, We can monitor bleeding of our post TPA patients. Post discharge, we need to have these levels recorded so that during consultation, after hospitalization, we have a baseline after 3 months, after 6 months. Monitor adherence to secondary preventions, like monitor how the patient takes the antiplatelet, the statins, antihypertensive. We need also to assess depression because our patient is being limited with activities, with all the hobbies, and there are some events that instead of taking medications, depression kicks in and it causes non-adherence. So we also have to consider that one. And post-stroke fatigue. As pharmacists and future clinical pharmacists, we have to make sure that our care process in stroke is in order. I have included it, this is from the Bureau, so that we will be able to have an idea on how to manage or to craft a recommendation. Starting from prelim, when we had hypertension, and then we have atrial fibrillation. Then now we have dyslipidemia and acute coronary syndrome. The very important or the ultimate complication all of this can cause is stroke. Hence, I have included here in our lecture for stroke our patient care process. There is assessment, clinical stability check, we have plan of care, we have this that we need to make sure we know about. These are mentioned starting from our prelim topics up to the acute coronary syndrome topics. And all of these are incorporated here so that we will not forget a thing in our patient care process. Because if we are not able to process or to manage our patients having stroke or status post stroke, it really is crucial because the next time the patient will experience stroke, it may cost them their life. So please review all of this here, as this is already the summary, consolidated ideas and key points that we have to know as pharmacists and you are expected to carry out when you evaluate and implement care process for a patient. What are the key takeaways? Of course, stroke is a medical emergency. Why? What happened, love? I have class. Huh? All right. For key takeaways, please make sure that your patient, when you do patient counseling for hypertension, for dyslipidemia, make sure they are aware about stroke. And it is a medical emergency. There's no coming back from it. It is irreversible. The damage that it can cause to the brain, either it's ischemic or hemorrhagic, if the patient doesn't die, but their quality of life really is decreased significantly. So we have to mention this earlier, the earliest possible, if we are talking to a patient with hypertension with a hyperdyslipidemic status. Also, we have to take note of permissive hypertension because we might think about why the doctor is allowing this to happen, why the doctor is not giving more antihypertensive. So we have to allow this, as mentioned a while ago, to avoid hypoperfusion. Lower blood pressure, meaning our heart pump less, so there will be less movement of blood along the vessels. So we need perfusion, we need higher pressure. We need to achieve that. And it is being helped if we have to follow those, uh, and it is being helped by administering alteplase or tenecteplase or thrombectomy if needed for our patient. And our secondary, and please take note, and please take note that our secondary prevention is due for a lifetime. Our antiplatelets, anticoagulants, statins, antihypertensive, and much more lifestyle modification is lifetime, lifelong. And also encourage our patients. Our approach here is multidisciplinary. So aside from pharmacists that renders for adherence, reduce recurrence, they have to consider also therapy if there is disability in walking. Also, we have to talk to nutritionists for their management, for their diet, and other multidisciplinary allied health practitioners that can help them aside from the doctors. For us as pharmacists, we have to start our role as early as possible so that our profession will not be discounted for stroke prevention and for our patients in the community. Okay? So we have here an analysis case and applications that you need to answer as part of your classwork for module 7. So I hope everyone was able to follow and annotate their own modules. And I hope you have learned something relevant this day. And please review the recording and review the modules. And of course, all of these we have derived from the Piro, and we have here Kleindorfer and Powers, and also from Canadian Cardiovascular Society as well. That would be all. Thank you very much for listening.